Story 1. It was a quiet evening, one of those where time feels like it's stretching until it snaps. I was working late, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound breaking the silence. The usual barrage of emails and phone calls had quieted, leaving me alone with nothing but the papers scattered across my desk. Staying late wasn't unusual, but tonight felt different. Darker. Like the air itself had turned heavier. As I sifted through the files, a soft whisper sliced through the silence, my name. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. At first, I chalked it up to the wind or maybe my tired mind playing tricks. But then it came again, this time clearer, sharper, almost urgent, Sarah. I froze, my pen hovering above the page. The office was empty. There was no one else here. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, a chill creeping up my spine. I stood, the uneasy feeling curling in my gut. The building was too quiet, unnervingly quiet. I walked down the hallway, checking the office doors, empty. The lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist as I passed. I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. Who had called my name? And why was I the only one left in this vast, silent building? I reached the stairwell, hesitated, then descended. Each step echoed too loudly in the emptiness, the air colder with every floor I passed. The lights below flickered like old ghosts, dim and distant, as if the building hadn't been used in ages. I called out, my voice breaking the silence, but there was no response. This building had been my home away from home for years, but tonight it felt unfamiliar, like a place I had never been before. The walls seemed to grow taller, the shadows longer. When I reached the ground floor, I checked the security desk. The chair was empty, the monitor that usually displayed the cameras was black. My breath quickened as I realized, with a sickening jolt, that there was no one on duty. The building had emptied out hours ago, and I hadn't noticed. How had I been so lost in my work that I hadn't even realized I was alone? I stood there for a moment, trapped in that unsettling realization. The front door was locked, and there was no sound coming from the outside. I was cut off. The thought of leaving seemed like an impossible task, the weight of the silence pressing in on me. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing at the far end of the hallway, watching me, but there was nothing. Just the dim flicker of lights and the echo of my own breath. I made my way back to the elevator, hoping to find someone, anything, that could explain this eerie stillness. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped inside. The familiar creak of the cables as it began to ascend sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. It felt as if the building itself were holding its breath, waiting. The doors opened to the top floor, revealing an empty hallway. The lights were brighter here, but the air was thick, almost suffocating. Every step I took echoed, bouncing off the walls like a warning. I walked down the corridor, eyes darting from door to door, half expecting to see someone, anyone, but the floor was still, deserted, nothing but the hum of the air conditioning. When I reached my office, the door was slightly ajar. I had locked it behind me earlier, yet now it was as if someone had been inside. I pushed the door open carefully, scanning the room. Everything was as I had left it, except for one thing. On my desk, beside my laptop, was a small piece of paper. I hadn't left it there. My heart stopped as I walked over to it. The paper was blank at first, but as I stared at it, words began to form in a hand I didn't recognize, leave now. The words burned into my mind, the message clear and chilling. Who had written it? Why now? Why when I was already so unsettled? The room felt colder, the air thick with something I couldn't name. The whispers had stopped, but the eerie presence of someone lingered, like a shadow that never left. I grabbed my coat, heading toward the exit, my footsteps quickening. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity, the walls pressing in around me, the quiet too suffocating. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I rushed toward the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I checked the time. Hours had passed since the building should have closed. How had I ended up locked in? Panic surged as I pounded on the door, my heart racing. How was this happening? And then, the whispers returned. Sarah. It was the same voice, faint, yet crystal clear, calling to me from somewhere in the empty darkness. My breath caught in my chest. I turned around, half expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just the hollow silence of the building, and the whispers. I checked the windows, locked, just like everything else. I was trapped. The building was a maze, and I had no idea how to escape. The walls seemed to shift, changing, becoming unfamiliar. How had everyone else left? Why had I been left behind? I walked back to the security desk, desperate for answers. As I approached, the monitor flickered to life, showing the usual empty halls. But then, something caught my eye. In one of the rooms, there was a figure standing in the corner, staring directly at the camera. I froze, blood turning to ice. The figure, it was me. I hadn't been there. The whispers grew louder, closer, and I knew then that I wasn't alone. Story 2. I had spent the whole afternoon running errands, bouncing from one store to the next, when I realized something was wrong. My phone, gone. Panic swept over me as I reached for my pocket, only to find it empty. I quickly checked my bag, my jacket pockets, retracing every step I had taken. I had been so careful earlier that morning, making sure everything was in place. But now, it was like my phone had vanished into thin air. Frantic, I sat down on a nearby bench, trying to steady my breath. I glanced at the time on my wristwatch, but it did nothing to ease the growing panic in my chest. My phone held everything: contacts, emails, reminders, my music that accompanied every part of my routine. Without it, it felt like a vital part of me was missing. I dug through my bag again, hoping it had somehow slipped to the bottom, but what I found instead made my heart skip a beat. There, nestled between my things, was a phone. At first, I barely noticed it, so wrapped up in my own panic that I almost missed it. But there it was, an old, cracked device, its dark, dull color completely out of place against the sleek, modern phone I was used to. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't mine. I reached for it cautiously, my hands trembling, not sure whether to feel relief at finding a phone or dread at the thought that it wasn't my own. The case was plain, worn, as if it had been carried around for years. I turned it over, inspecting it like it held some dark secret. Had I somehow picked up someone else's phone? But I couldn't remember ever seeing this device before, let alone putting it into my bag. I checked my bag once more, hoping it was a mistake. No such luck. My phone was gone, replaced by this stranger. Hesitation gnawed at me. Should I hand it in? Or was I supposed to figure out where it came from? My curiosity won out, and I pressed a few buttons to wake it. The screen remained stubbornly dark. Then, I noticed the low battery icon, a tiny red bar confirming my worst fear: it wouldn't turn on until I charged it. Frustrated, I shoved it back into my bag. Something felt terribly wrong, but I had no idea what to do next. That night, when I got home, I set both phones on the kitchen counter, my mind still racing. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I plugged the unfamiliar phone in, hoping the power might offer some answers. As it flickered to life, I held my breath, waiting. For a brief moment, I thought I saw my name on the lock screen. But when the screen brightened again, it wasn't my name. Instead, a chilling message appeared: "I know what you did." My blood ran cold. Who would send something like that? The words didn't make sense, but their impact was immediate. I tried to open the messages, but the phone shut down abruptly, as if the message had triggered a malfunction. I stared at the now dark screen, my mind spiraling. I didn't know who owned this phone or how it had ended up in my bag, but the message, it lingered, heavy and ominous. I checked my own phone again, praying it had somehow turned up, but it was still missing. There were no strange notifications, no unusual messages, everything appeared normal. But as I stared at the empty space where my phone had been, an unsettling thought took root. How had I lost my phone? And why had it been replaced with this strange one? Who had sent that message? I couldn't stop the questions from swirling. I had to get to the bottom of it. Gripped by a sense of dread, I decided to call one of the numbers stored in the phone's contacts. My fingers shook as I dialed the number, my breath shallow. After a few rings, someone picked up. But they didn't say anything. I tried to speak, but before I could ask a single question, the line went dead. My stomach twisted into knots, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. The phone in my hand pulsed with an eerie energy, as if it were alive, watching me. Without thinking, I disconnected the call and shoved the phone back into my bag. But the unease didn't fade. It lingered, the sensation of being watched, of something, or someone, following me. I had stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to see, and now, there was no escaping it. Story 3. The music slammed against my chest, the beat pulsing through every inch of me. Lights flashed, synchronized perfectly with the rhythm, creating a dizzying sense of euphoria. It was one of those rare nights where everything felt right. I'd been counting down the days for this concert, and now I was here, surrounded by a sea of excited faces. The crowd swayed, singing along to every word, the energy infectious. For a moment, nothing seemed like it could ruin the night. But then I felt it. A tap. Light but sharp. Insistent. It sliced through the booming music, yanking me out of my trance. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. My eyes instinctively searched the crowd as I turned around, expecting to see a friend, maybe someone trying to catch my attention. But when I looked, there was no one. The space behind me was empty, the people moving around me as if I hadn't even turned. I shook my head, brushing off the sudden chill creeping up my spine. It was nothing. Someone had just brushed past me, or maybe I'd imagined it. I turned back to the stage, forcing myself to focus, but the strange sensation lingered. It gnawed at the edges of my mind. I tried to push it aside, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket, its vibration cutting through the noise. I pulled it out, half expecting a message from a friend. Instead, the screen flashed a chilling notification: "You're not alone." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing. I hadn't heard my phone buzz, hadn't seen any notification. And there was no contact name, no number. Just those 5 words, clear and cold. My fingers trembled as I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. Who could have sent this? I was surrounded by people, but I hadn't seen anyone near me close enough to type the message. My eyes scanned the crowd, looking for something, anything, out of place. But the sea of faces was absorbed in the music, no one paying attention to me. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was. The tap on my shoulder, the message. It was all too precise, too deliberate. It felt like someone was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to make their presence known. I pulled my jacket tighter, trying to push down the rising sense of dread. Maybe it was a prank, a joke someone was playing. But no, this didn't feel like a joke. It felt real, like the sender knew something I didn't, as if they were aware of me, aware of where I was, of everything happening around me. I scrolled through my contacts in a blind panic, searching for a name that didn't belong, but there was nothing. No one who would send something like this. The weight of the crowd around me pressed in, the heat of so many bodies suffocating. The music, once vibrant and alive, was now just a distant hum, swallowed by the panic rising in my chest. I checked the message again, hoping it would make more sense if I looked at it longer. But then something strange happened. The words on the screen shifted. They moved, changing when I wasn't looking directly at them. My eyes widened. I blinked. And then the message was clearer. More terrifying. I'm right behind you. I spun around so fast that I almost stumbled, my heart pounding in my chest. The crowd surged past me, laughing and dancing, lost in their own world. But behind me? Nothing. No one. No one standing just inches away. My breath quickened, shallow gasps escaping me as I stood frozen, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Whoever was sending those messages, whoever was doing this, was still watching me. Desperate for some semblance of safety, I tried to push my way through the crowd, my mind spiraling in confusion and fear. I needed to find my friends, to feel their presence, but the crowd was a wall of strangers, pressing in on every side. The music roared louder, the chaos all around me drowning out any sense of control. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it, panic flooding my veins. I checked the screen, praying for something that would explain it all. There was nothing new. The same chilling message sat there, "You're not alone." A cold sweat prickled across my skin. Was I imagining it all? Was this just anxiety, the overwhelming sensation of being lost in the crowd? Or was something truly wrong? Then it happened again. A tap on my shoulder. This time, I didn't turn around immediately. My body was frozen with fear, the tap too soft, too playful. It was like someone was trying to get my attention, but I knew better. I could feel the presence behind me, pressing in on my skin, suffocating me. I checked my phone one last time, but there was nothing new, no new message, no notification, just the eerie silence of the screen. And then, in the reflection of the glass near me, I saw it. A shadow. A figure. Standing just behind me. Too tall. Too still. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For the first time that night, I wanted to disappear into the crowd. But the figure remained, watching. Waiting. Story 4. It was a cool, crisp morning, perfect for a jog. I laced up my shoes and stepped outside, the early morning fog still lingering in the park. As I began my usual route, the park was eerily quiet, save for the sound of my feet hitting the pavement and the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. It was the kind of solitude I cherished, the stillness before the world fully woke up. But then, as I rounded the first bend, I heard it, footsteps behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe someone else was out for a jog, just like me. The sound was steady, rhythmic, keeping pace with mine. I quickened my step, hoping to leave them behind, but the footsteps only grew louder, closer. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another runner, someone pushing themselves just as hard as I was. But when I turned, the path behind me was empty. The sound had stopped. No one was there. I slowed my pace, scanning the area, but the park remained still, as if nothing had changed. It didn't make sense. The sound had been so close, right behind me, but now, nothing. I shook my head, brushing it off as my imagination running wild. Maybe it was the wind, or the echoes of my own footsteps bouncing off the trees. But as I started jogging again, a nagging sensation crept up my spine. Someone was watching me. I could feel it, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. My heart started to race, and I picked up the pace, trying to outrun the unease tightening in my chest. Minutes passed, and then, I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was definitely behind me, matching my stride. I glanced back. Once again, there was no one there. The path remained empty. Not a soul in sight. I stopped, my legs trembling slightly, my breath catching in my throat. What was happening? My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A prank? Someone messing with me? But no, the footsteps had been too real, too distinct. They had been right there, close enough to touch. I began walking, trying to calm myself. The fog was lifting, and the park was slowly coming into clearer view. Benches, lamp posts, but no one else in sight. I scanned the area again, nothing. Just empty paths and trees swaying gently in the breeze. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. The sound was back, closer now, as if someone had materialized right behind me. I sped up, but the footsteps stayed right there, perfectly synchronized with my own. My pulse quickened, a knot formed in my stomach, and the dread began to sink in. I reached the next bend in the path and stopped once more, glancing over my shoulder. Empty. The footsteps had stopped too. Only my own breath, ragged and uneven, filled the silence. The birds continued their distant chirping, mocking the stillness around me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't explain it. I had heard those footsteps. I had felt them, as though someone were right behind me. But now, nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had been running behind me, and the sound had carried. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. The park was vast. I had been so focused on my own pace, there was no way anyone could have gotten that close without me noticing. Then, suddenly, louder, faster, the footsteps came again. Almost running now, they were right behind me. I turned around, heart racing, but the path was still empty. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and my legs felt weak beneath me. I had to get out of there. I didn't care if it was my imagination, or something else entirely. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I turned and started running toward the park's exit, each step frantic, desperate. The footsteps followed, growing louder with every stride. I dared not look back. The sound was deafening, but when I stole a glance over my shoulder, nothing. The park seemed endless, the exit too far away. I pushed harder, my legs burning with effort, but the footsteps stayed with me, always just behind. It was like they were mirroring my every move, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. Finally, I reached the park's exit. My legs felt like lead, my chest was heaving as I burst through the gate. The footsteps stopped. I spun around, gasping for breath, but the path behind me was empty. The park was silent. No one there. Nothing. I stood there for a long moment, trying to steady my breath, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. What had just happened? I had heard those footsteps. I had felt their presence, so real, so close. But now, there was nothing. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to explain it. I just wanted to get away from that place. As I walked home, the nagging sensation lingered, a weight in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something I couldn't see. The thought gnawed at me, unsettling me more with each step. Would I ever truly feel alone again? Story 5. I had just returned from a weekend getaway, eager to settle back into the comfort of my own home. But as I opened the door, I felt it, a chill in the air, despite the warmth of the day outside. The coldness was unsettling, seeping into my bones like a warning. Yet, it wasn't the temperature that truly rattled me, it was the suffocating sense that something was wrong. I stood frozen in the doorway, scanning the living room, and that's when I saw it, every single piece of furniture had been moved. It wasn't drastic, but just enough to twist the room into something unfamiliar. I stepped inside, the unease creeping up my spine, refusing to let go. The couch, no longer where I had left it, stood at a strange angle, the coffee table a few inches off-center. The bookshelves, which I always aligned perfectly against the wall, were now askew, like they had been nudged just for this moment. The air, still cold, seemed to hang thick, as if the silence in the room was holding its breath, watching me. I couldn't figure it out. How had everything shifted while I was gone? Had I forgotten moving things around before I left? But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I moved further into the room, inspecting it with a growing sense of dread. Nothing was broken, nothing destroyed, but the small, deliberate changes felt invasive. Like someone had come into my space and rearranged it, just enough to make it wrong. My heart started to race. What if someone had been in here? But no, I'd locked everything before leaving, windows, doors, all secure. Yet, the unease lingered like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I double-checked the windows. All locked, just as they should be. My mind began to play tricks on me, trying to convince me I had imagined how the room looked before. But deep inside, I knew something was off. The coldness in the air, the way the room felt strangely hollow, it was as if the house was holding something back. I moved to the kitchen, hoping to distract myself. I made tea, hoping the warmth would chase away the dread gnawing at me. But the coldness of the living room stayed with me, tugging at my thoughts. I kept glancing back toward the doorway, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing there. The longer I stayed, the more I felt as though I was being watched, though I couldn't say by whom. As I sank onto the couch, I realized it wasn't how I'd left it. The cushions, slightly out of place, suggested someone had sat there recently, adjusting everything just enough to leave a trace. I reached down to feel the fabric, but it was freezing, far colder than it should have been. It was as if time had stopped in this room, leaving it frozen in a moment that didn't belong to me. I stood and moved toward the bookshelf, trying to find something familiar to ground me. But then I noticed it, one of the books, pulled slightly out of place. A book I hadn't read in years. A book I hadn't moved. I pulled it from the shelf, and the musty scent of dust and old paper hit me, like it had been waiting for someone to find it. The deeper I looked, the more things didn't add up. A chair in the corner had been shifted. The rug beneath me felt colder than the rest of the room, almost as if it had been left untouched for years. Even the light fixture, dimmer than it should have been, seemed to cast a darker, more oppressive shadow over the space. The room, once so familiar, now felt foreign, like I had stepped into a version of my home that wasn't quite mine. I tried to push the panic down, telling myself it was all in my head, but the sense of wrongness was overwhelming. I couldn't ignore it. I decided to leave the living room and check the bedroom, hoping for some sense of normalcy. But as I reached the top of the stairs, my blood ran cold. The bedroom door, which I'd left slightly ajar, was now wide open. Fear surged through me, but I steadied myself and pushed the door all the way open. At first, everything seemed normal, bed made, dresser in place, windows shut. But then I saw it, the drawers of the dresser were open, just a crack. My heart began to pound. I could have sworn everything had been in its place when I left, but now it felt as though someone had rifled through my things. I checked the closet, half expecting to find someone hiding in there, but it was empty. The tension in the house was suffocating. I could feel it, someone had been here. Someone had been watching me, waiting for me to return. I turned on my heel, rushing back downstairs, desperate to escape. As I passed through the living room again, I realized the coldness had begun to fade. But the unease? That was still there. The furniture was still rearranged, the air still felt wrong. I grabbed my phone, dialing a friend, begging if I could stay with them for a night or two. I needed to get out. I needed to leave that house. My friend agreed, and within minutes, I was out the door, heading to the safety of someone else's home. But as I glanced back at my house, standing there in the dimming light, I wondered, would I ever truly understand what had happened while I was gone? That night, I lay awake in my friend's guest room, but the feeling never left me. Something in that house had changed, shifted in a way I couldn't explain. The coldness, the rearranged furniture, the oppressive feeling of being watched, it all lingered in my mind. I knew one thing for certain, something was different, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel comfortable in that house again. Story 6. I had come home after a grueling day at work, my body heavy with exhaustion. The kind of fatigue that makes the weight of the world feel like it's pressing down on your chest. The apartment I had just moved into felt quiet, eerily so, but still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The walls creaked with the slightest movements, as if they were alive, whispering secrets in the silence of the night. I often felt like I wasn't alone, even when I was. I made sure to lock the door as I always did, the satisfying click of the deadbolt a small comfort in the stillness. My shoes, discarded in the hallway earlier, lay near the door. I considered picking them up but was too tired, too overwhelmed. It wasn't a big deal. I'd get them in the morning. But as I crawled into bed, a strange unease settled over me. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name, and the darkness pressed in around me like a suffocating shroud. I rolled over, trying to push away the sensation, and eventually drifted into a fitful sleep, filled with strange, foggy dreams that I could never quite remember. When I woke, it wasn't the soft, gradual awakening I was used to. It was abrupt, like I'd been yanked out of a deep, dreamless sleep. My mind felt fuzzy, disoriented, and the first thing I noticed made my heart skip a beat. The door to my bedroom was wide open. I was sure I'd locked it before bed. A cold wave of panic swept over me as I tried to piece it together. I had no memory of getting out of bed or unlocking the door. Why was it open now? I swung my legs off the bed, the cold floor sending a shiver up my spine. The silence in the room felt too absolute. My eyes darted around, but everything seemed to be in its place. I stood up, slowly, trying to calm my racing heart, and checked the apartment. It was quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hallway outside was dim, bathed in the faint glow of streetlights, and the door to the living room stood ajar. I hesitated, torn between investigating and calling someone, but the rational part of me pushed the fear aside. I must have simply forgotten to lock it. It was nothing. But as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Right at the entrance of the apartment, my shoes sat, neatly placed side by side. I had left them in a haphazard pile near the door the night before. Now they were arranged perfectly, as if someone had carefully set them there, not a crease or scuff to be seen. My mind screamed in confusion. What the hell was going on? Had I been sleepwalking? Had someone been in my apartment while I slept? I bent down to pick them up, my hands trembling. There was no sign of a struggle. No sign of anything unusual, except for the door to my bedroom, now open, and my shoes, placed with unnerving precision. No one had keys to my apartment. I hadn't heard anything during the night. The logical explanations slipped through my fingers like smoke. Something was wrong. Something was missing. I walked into the living room, every shadow a threat, every corner a potential hiding spot. The apartment, as small and familiar as it was, suddenly felt alien, filled with a tension I couldn't explain. I double-checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Everything seemed secure, but that feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at me from the shadows. I sat down on the couch, my thoughts spiraling. Could I have forgotten to lock the door? Maybe I moved the shoes without remembering. But nothing felt right. The silence was oppressive, like something had shifted in the air, something I couldn't quite grasp. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside my apartment, someone who knew exactly where to place my shoes, as if they were watching me all along. I called a friend, needing someone to talk to make sense of what had happened. As I recounted the events, my friend's voice was calm but their words struck fear in me. You should probably check your locks again, just to be sure. I hung up, my stomach heavy with dread, and went back to the door. The lock clicked into place with its usual sound, but it didn't bring me the comfort it once had. The unease refused to fade. I sat back down, staring at the shoes, their strange positioning still haunting me. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind throughout the day, but they kept creeping back in, lingering at the edge of my thoughts. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every rustle of wind outside, made me jump. I kept my bedroom door locked, but even then, the feeling of being watched never left. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone knew where my shoes were. And now, the thought of it kept me awake, wondering just how much I truly knew about the place I called home. Story 7. It all started with something so subtle, something so innocuous that at first, I thought I could easily dismiss it. One morning, as I was preparing for work, I glanced at my closet and noticed a jacket hanging in the back, a jacket I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine, nor did it belong to anyone I knew. I figured it might have been a forgotten gift from a friend. But as I looked closer, something felt off. The jacket appeared almost brand new, as if it had never been worn. I pushed the thought aside and went about my day. That is, until later that week when I found something else, this time, a pair of shoes tucked neatly under my bed. They were a size too small, with a style I would never choose for myself. My first instinct was to ask my roommate if they were hers, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right. I had been living alone for months, and I knew these shoes didn't belong to anyone else. Then came the scarf. A strange, brightly colored one, woven in a pattern I'd never seen before, nestled between my clothes in a drawer. My heart skipped as I pulled it out. I checked every drawer after that, and to my horror, I found more items: random clothes, a pair of leggings, a hoodie, even a baseball cap, none of it mine, none of it familiar. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind racing with impossible explanations. Maybe I had been sleepwalking, buying things I didn't remember. But no, I hadn't been to the store in weeks. Something far darker was at play. Someone was in my house. The thought gnawed at me, relentless, but I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just my overactive imagination. That night, I decided to check all the locks, windows, doors, everything. As I moved through the house, my skin prickled, a deep unease clawing at my senses. The house was unnervingly quiet, but something was wrong. Small things, subtle shifts. The couch cushions weren't arranged the way I'd left them. The bathroom light flickered on when I was sure I'd turned it off. A chill ran down my spine. The next morning, I stepped into the kitchen and froze. A cup of coffee sat on the counter, still warm. I hadn't made coffee. I didn't even drink it. My heart slammed in my chest, and the realization hit me like a punch: someone had been in my house, watching me. The fear was suffocating. I installed a camera, desperate for answers. The footage revealed nothing unusual at first, but then, around 2 a.m., a figure appeared. A shadow in the dark, moving silently through my living room. The person knew exactly where everything was, rifling through my things with chilling purpose. They moved into the kitchen, opened the fridge, sat at the table, and ate food I didn't remember leaving out. They sat on my couch, even flipped through books I hadn't touched in years. The figure was obscured by shadows, but I could see enough to know it wasn't anyone I recognized. My blood ran cold. This person had been living in my home, unnoticed. For how long? I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I fled to a friend's house, too terrified to stay alone. My mind raced with questions: how had they gotten in? Had they been there all along? Or had they only just started? The thought of someone lurking in the darkness, moving around in my own space, made my skin crawl. The next day, I called a locksmith, changing every lock in the house. I searched for any signs of the intruder, clothes, items, but found nothing. Everything seemed normal. Until I walked past my bedroom door. The floorboard near the door was slightly disturbed, the wood creaking under my weight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched down, pulled at the edge of the board, and revealed a hidden compartment beneath it. Inside was a pile of clothes, more that didn't belong to me. A t-shirt, a jacket, a pair of jeans, and something else. A small notebook. I flipped through the pages, and my stomach twisted. The words were simple, almost childlike. She still doesn't know. I can't wait to see her face when she finds out I'm here. I froze. The entries were written in the present tense, as if the person was still inside my house, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I shoved the notebook back into the compartment and closed the floorboard, my mind racing, heart pounding. I called the police, explained everything. They combed through the house, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. No clothes, no hidden compartment. They assured me they would look into it, but I wasn't sure if they believed me. How could they? What could I tell them? It was a nightmare I couldn't fully explain, a mystery without answers. I never learned who had been living in my house, or why they had chosen me. But the feeling of being watched never left. Every creak in the night, every misplaced item, every flicker of light, there was always that lingering thought. What if the person was still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return? Story 8. I was sorting through a pile of old boxes in my garage, trying to declutter, when I stumbled upon a dusty file folder. Its yellowed edges were frayed, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. Curious, I opened it and found a collection of old newspapers, their ink faded but still readable. I was about to toss the folder aside when a headline in bold black letters seemed to leap out at me. Local woman found dead under mysterious circumstances. Intrigued, I flipped through the pages. My breath caught when I saw the accompanying photo. It was a black and white image of a woman standing in front of a house, smiling faintly at the camera. But what froze me in place wasn't the house, it was her face. She looked exactly like me. The same brown hair, the same dark eyes, even the same subtle expression I often wore in photos. My heart raced as I stared at the photo, feeling an uncanny sense of unease. I didn't recognize the house, and I was certain I'd never seen this woman before. Yet the resemblance was undeniable. Flipping back to the article, I searched for more details, desperate for answers. But the text offered little. A local resident found dead under strange circumstances. No name. No context. Just that vague, unsettling headline. I couldn't look away from the picture. Who was she? How could someone who looked so much like me have lived in this town, my town, without me ever hearing of her? The whole thing felt surreal, like stepping into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I had lived here my entire life, yet I'd never seen or heard of this woman before. And stranger still, it seemed as though no one else had either. The next day, I went to the local library, determined to uncover more. I sifted through dusty archives and fragile microfilm, but it was as if the woman had been erased from history. There were no follow-up articles, no obituaries, no records of her life, or her death. Hours of searching left me with nothing. Growing more unsettled, I turned to the local police. When I showed the article to an officer, he frowned. "I've worked here for over 20 years, he said, shaking his head, and I've never heard of this case." His words sent a shiver down my spine. How could a death so mysterious, so close to home, be completely forgotten? Back home, the unease gnawed at me. I couldn't let it go. I pulled out the article again, scrutinizing every detail. And then I noticed something I'd missed before, a faint, handwritten note scrawled in the margin of the page. The words were nearly illegible, written in a hurried hand. After squinting at it for a moment, I managed to make them out. "She was just like you." My blood turned cold. The words seemed to leap off the page, as though they were meant specifically for me. Who had written them? And what did they mean? I couldn't stop replaying the questions in my mind. Had someone planted this file for me to find? Had someone been watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal this? Or was there something deeper, something I couldn't even begin to comprehend? I decided to visit the local cemetery, hoping it might hold some answers. The air was thick and heavy as I walked through the rows of gravestones, scanning the names. After what felt like hours, I found it, a weathered stone with an unfamiliar name. But the dates matched the timeline in the article. My knees felt weak as I knelt in front of the grave. This was her. The woman from the photograph. The one who looked so much like me. As I stared at her name, a strange disconnection settled over me. It was as if my life wasn't entirely my own anymore, as though I were somehow entangled in hers. How could someone who resembled me so perfectly have lived, and died, in my town without leaving a trace? The longer I stood there, the more the questions consumed me. I felt like a character in a story I couldn't escape, caught in a web of mystery that offered no answers, only more shadows. I left the cemetery that day, but the image of her face, the haunting familiarity of her smile, stayed with me. Whatever had happened to her, whatever connection she had to me, remained a puzzle, a chilling, unanswered riddle that refused to let me go. Story 9. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that made you want to step outside and lose yourself in the hum of a busy city. The downtown streets were alive with movement, shoppers darting in and out of stores, conversations blending into a steady buzz, and the sun spilling its warmth onto the pavement. I was enjoying the simple pleasure of just being part of it all when I caught sight of someone in the crowd. My steps faltered. It wasn't just anyone, this person looked familiar. Too familiar. My chest tightened as recognition surged through me, though I couldn't quite place where I'd seen them before. Without thinking, I began weaving through the crowd, my eyes locked on the back of their head. They moved with purpose, steady, deliberate, not fast enough to be running, but not slow enough to linger. My pulse quickened. Who were they? And why did it feel so important to know? As they turned down a narrow alley, I hesitated for the briefest moment, but curiosity dragged me forward. I hurried to the corner and peeked around, expecting to see their retreating figure. But the alley was empty. Completely, eerily empty. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, scanning every shadow, every corner. Nothing. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. My breath caught, and unease settled in my chest like a weight. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or my mind. Shaking my head, I tried to shrug it off and returned home, determined to forget the strange encounter. But the next morning, my resolve shattered. In my mailbox, nestled among the usual clutter of bills and flyers, was a plain white envelope. No return address. My name was written on it in neat, precise handwriting. I froze. Peeling the envelope open with trembling hands, I found a single sheet of paper. The message was brief, just 4 words. Why did you follow me? I stared at it, my skin prickling with cold dread. My mind raced, replaying the events from the day before. No one could have known. I hadn't told anyone, and there'd been no way for someone to see me in the crowded streets. And yet, here it was, a letter addressed to me. The handwriting wasn't familiar. There were no clues, no signatures, nothing to explain who had sent it or why. But the timing was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a coincidence. I told myself it had to be a prank. Someone must have seen me and thought it'd be funny to mess with me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. The next few days passed in a haze of unease. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, scanning faces in the crowd, half expecting to see that person again. The city felt different now, smaller somehow, more claustrophobic. Like it was watching me. Then, another letter arrived. This one was even shorter. I'm waiting. My stomach churned as I stared at the words. Waiting for what? For me. The dread that had been simmering under the surface boiled over. I felt trapped, caught in some kind of game I didn't understand. Determined to get answers, I retraced my steps that evening. I followed the same path through the busy streets, back to the alley where I'd last seen them. The city was alive around me, but I felt like I was walking through a different world, one where I was the only one who noticed the cracks in the surface. When I reached the alley, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I turned the corner, bracing myself for another empty stretch of pavement. But this time, they were there. Standing in the same spot where they had vanished before. My breath hitched. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching me. Their face was partially obscured by shadows, but something about them felt off. As I stepped closer, the dim light shifted. And then I saw it. The face staring back at me wasn't a stranger's. It was mine. Not just similar, exactly the same. Every feature, every line, every detail. It was like staring into a mirror, but the reflection didn't feel real. My knees buckled, and cold terror washed over me. The person, the thing, tilted its head, as if amused. And then it smiled. Story 10. The evening was quiet, unnervingly so, as I trudged home after a grueling day at work. The sun hung low in the sky, its waning light stretching shadows across the pavement. My feet throbbed with every step, my thoughts focused only on the relief of collapsing on my couch. As I rounded the corner, the familiar silhouette of my car came into view, parked precisely where I'd left it. But then, something stopped me in my tracks. A woman was standing beside it. She faced away from me, her posture unnaturally still. A long coat clung to her form, despite the mild evening air, and her dark hair cascaded loosely over her shoulders. At first, I thought she might be waiting for someone or possibly lost. But there was something about her that felt wrong. Her stillness. It wasn't the kind of stillness that came from patience or calm. It was the kind that prickled at the edges of your instincts, whispering that something wasn't right. I slowed my steps, my pulse quickening despite the silence of the deserted street. Clearing my throat, I tried to make my presence known. "Excuse me, are you all right?" My voice wavered slightly. She didn't move. The unease in my chest deepened, yet I found myself taking a few cautious steps closer. My curiosity warred with the growing dread that clung to the air like a heavy fog. I was close enough now to reach out, to touch her shoulder, but something stopped me. She turned. Slowly. Too slowly. Her movements were unnaturally deliberate, as if even acknowledging me required effort. When her face met mine, I froze. Her skin was pallid, almost translucent, and her wide, unblinking eyes seemed to peer straight through me. Her lips parted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was a whisper that scraped against my nerves. "I've been waiting for you." The words sent a shiver down my spine. My mind scrambled to understand, to make sense of the situation. I didn't know this woman. I had never seen her before in my life. Yet, the way she stared at me made me feel as though she knew everything about me. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "Who are you? What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step closer. Instinctively, I stepped back. My heart was pounding now, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. "Why are you waiting for me?" I demanded, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. She tilted her head, her gaze unyielding. Her expression didn't change, but her presence became heavier, suffocating. "Because you're the one I've been looking for," she said, her voice laced with a chilling mixture of desperation and certainty. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. There was something old-fashioned about her, as if she'd stepped out of another time. Her coat, her demeanor, even the air around her, it all felt out of place, out of sync. The faint hum of an approaching car broke the eerie silence, momentarily grounding me. I turned my head toward the sound, relief washing over me at the thought of another human presence. But when I looked back, she was gone. Vanished. My heart raced as I frantically scanned the empty street. There were no footsteps, no rustling of movement, just the fading sound of the car passing by. It was as if she'd been swallowed by the shadows themselves. I darted to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there, trying to catch my breath. My mind reeled, replaying her words over and over. "I've been waiting for you." Who was she? How did she know me? What did she want? The drive home felt endless, the streetlights casting distorted shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see her pale face staring back at me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I hesitated. The safety of my house, usually so comforting, now felt fragile. Vulnerable. Her words echoed in my mind, carrying a weight I couldn't shake. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the front door, too afraid to move. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I knew I couldn't explain what had happened in a way that wouldn't sound absurd. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car, my gaze darting to the empty street. She wasn't there. But as I stood on the sidewalk, the weight of her presence lingered, as though she was watching me from somewhere unseen. That night, I didn't sleep. Her face, her voice, her chilling words, they haunted me. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't gone. She was waiting.